Hi, my name is Josiah Smith. I'm a PA and functional medicine practitioner, and today we are going to have a conversation with my good friend Roger. You want to just do a quick little introduction of yourself?
Hi, I'm Roger Drummer. I'm a diplomat of Chinese herbology and owner of HerbWorks.com. And so Josiah is my good friend here that helps me with functional medicine, so we decided to get together and have a little talk today.
Yeah. So let's do this, just a big picture overview before we actually get into the topic, which will be autoimmunity today. Let's discuss just a little bit a difference between conventional medicine and what functional medicine is specifically.
Oh, that's a great topic.
Okay? Yeah. So when you go to the doctor, okay, it's usually an end product of a symptom that you have, okay, such as you're fat, fatigue, stressed, depressed, and your doctor oftentimes looks at the symptom and oftentimes may be able to pair up a pill or something that goes with it or do some testing, okay? And often this may be helpful, it may not. But the question is, does it get to the underlying principle, to the why or the root cause? No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
No, it does not. And so many people, we have seen statistically, conventional medicine in the global economic industrialized world ranks 37th on the bottom for addressing and taking care of chronic disease. And also from that paradigm, we also realize in the United States, we have the highest per capita spent per patient, yet we have the sickest patients in the world. That's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
And I think there's a big paradigm shift with this, with what functional medicine is. It actually looks upstream, or use the analogy of a tree, for instance. The leaves of a tree oftentimes are the symptoms that you present with your doctor, okay? Now, if you go down the tree with the branches, the trunk, and the root, what functional medicine does, it looks at underlying causes, okay? And conventional medicine is compartmentalized, which means you'll have an organ system and a specialist. Okay, so if you go to your doctor with a complaint, say like gastrointestinal discomfort, he'll refer you to the gastroenterologist. Okay?
Right.
And what functional medicine does, it looks at all the body systems as a whole and how they interact. Because the bloodstream goes throughout the whole body, and disease does not happen by itself. Okay? Because the blood, if you have one problem, there's bound to be others. But conventional medicine just focuses on that one thing. And functional medicine looks at all potential causes. We're looking at stress, how you eat, how you sleep, environmental factors. There are just so many things. And when you address the root cause, even at the cellular level, remember, cells make an organ system, okay? An organ may have an actual body system, and ultimately that creates your health, okay? So
Right.
where is your state of health? From that, let's just kind of.
Well, you know what I love about it?
What's that?
And it really reminded me just hearing you talk,
Mm-hmm.
is that Chinese medicine is what I was trained in, is the, say, ancient form of functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the same thing. This is why the West doesn't understand Chinese medicine. You go in and you have a particular complaint, and they'll start to balance out your body, and you don't understand why they're doing that. It's because everything in Chinese medicine is about where is your imbalance, how do you improve that, and then balance out your body, right? Functional medicine, same idea, finding out what's the root cause of everything. Yet one of the advantages you have with functional medicine is they have so many great tests you can do now to pinpoint exactly what it is and then move forward from that point on.
Sure. So essentially, conventional medicine has lab work, but that is still limited.
Limited,
okay?
yes.
Just use an example with your digestive system. Oftentimes, you may have issues of gas, bloating, blood in your stool, and you go to the gastroenterologist. They can do endoscopy. They can look down the throat, or colonoscopy, up the rear end with a camera. But oftentimes, they're looking for functional and structural abnormalities. Occasionally, they can do a biopsy. It completely misses the microbiome, which we know has so much in relationship to our health. Hippocrates said, disease begins in the gut and ends in the gut. And it's coming full circle now with all the scientific evidence out there showing that everything begins in the gut. And that is focused on, and there's some other testing we can do. We like to check poop, because that's an awesome functional medicine test we can do, and also evaluate that for parasites, good bacteria versus bad bacteria, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So there's so many other things we can look at in addressing root causation.
It's kind of funny you mentioned everything's going back to the gut now, because in Chinese medicine, the two prevailing theories that everything originated from was the school of kidney. Everything's related to your kidney adrenal, which they call Jing. And the other school was digestion. Everything's related to your digestion. If you have good digestion, you'll never stay sick for very long. And you'll just recover so quick because it powers up your whole system. So it kind of correlates completely with what they look at now in functional medicine.
Absolutely. And now we have just kind of a big overview of functional medicine and maybe Chinese.
Right.
Now, let's actually go into the topic we're going to discuss that now is autoimmunity. Okay?
Right.
I am finding in practice so many people coming in with autoimmune disease. But remember, a disease is what conventional medicine puts a label on. Okay, a collection of symptoms or blood tests, and they have a label. And here's the thing: when we think of autoimmunity, it means the body self-attacking self. And the conventional standpoint will give you immunosuppressing drugs, which is going to suppress your immune system even more. It's already suppressed. Why do we need to suppress it even more? But the conventional system does not address it well at all. Okay. And with autoimmunity, there's a triad which we talk about. First of all, we used to think there's a genetic predisposition for this. Okay,
right.
So it could be in your genes. Okay, and the second one, there are environmental influences.
Yeah.
And the third thing, which we're finding is on the forefront, has to do with the gut. Again, it has to do with intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut syndrome, which seems to be a catchphrase right now. So let's actually discuss that a little
right.
bit.
In what I do, what you look at first off, if someone came to me, is you look at stress. Because everything does go back to the gut, and especially leaky gut. It's probably one of the source reasons for most autoimmune conditions is things making it into your bloodstream that shouldn't be there. We look at stress because everybody knows in medicine that once you're stressed out, if you have chronic stress, what happens is your body shuts off at least 50% of your digestion, because you don't need to be digesting food if you're stressed out.
So that's
if you're
that
in fight or flight
response,
no digestion, no immune system. So
no reproduction.
All this stuff happens, right? Because you're chronically stressed or having a stressful moment. Well, most people have that moment every single day, all day long, because they're locked into chronic stress.
So we have this underlying current of chronic stress, where if we look at our Paleolithic ancestors, a stressful moment, if you're being chased by, say, a bear, saber-toothed tiger, okay, your immune system gets suppressed and you have blood flow that goes to your extremities so you can run and get away from danger.
Right.
And then you go back into more of a parasympathetic rest and digest. Or you see this in the animal kingdom. When they're on the hunt, it's for a very short period of time. And what do the other 23 hours? They sleep. They rest.
They rest. They forget about it.
They
don't have the memory of something having happened to them that they're wondering what they're going to do for the next 8 days about that stressful situation.
Sure. So let's discuss stress specifically here, because there are different forms of stress. First of all, when we think about stress, there is perceived stress, how that affects our past experiences and how we react to it. So that would be the first type of stress I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, Mark Twain had a great quote about that I love. I love a lot of his quotes, but my favorite one was, "I've suffered many traumas in my life, some of which actually happened."
Some of it actually happened.
So basically what he's saying is that most of this stuff is just in your mind.
It is in your mind.
You hold on to ideas about what's going to happen, how people are going to react, and it rarely ever comes out that way. Yet it locks you in to that experience just like it happened. Your body goes into fight or flight. Your digestion goes completely off. Your immune system's disrupted. You're losing adrenal energy. Your whole body goes into a mode of destruction. It's basically breaking down. It cannot build anything up in that condition. And this is the state that most people are in all day long.
And it's interesting that you say that. We talk about a state. This is your mind and how you react to it. So you could actually have two people in the same room with the exact same stressors. One, they're just going to completely fall apart. The other, they just take it as if it was an everyday, not an issue. Yeah. And now that perceived stress does break down body systems with balance. Now let's talk about 3 other stressors, particularly which we don't always think about. First of all is going to be circadian rhythm. Okay, glycemic dysregulation, and then some of those hidden ones, such as toxic exposures, gluten, intestinal parasites, okay, EMFs, and things like that. So let's discuss, we now have the perceived stress and how we actually internalize it, our perception of the world. Now let's talk about circadian rhythm and how that affects our hormones and stress response.
Well, it's fascinating that you brought all that up because most people just think of stress as emotional stress. And it is the biggie. You know, it's the biggie that sets you up for everything else. But your emotional stress can be made worse by the fact that your body's out of rhythm. Your body's not actually getting what it needs every day to go into a set rhythm pattern. And that's what your body likes. It likes a set pattern of function. You know, this is why everybody has set up kind of their life to eat 3 times a day. It just is natural for your body to like a rhythm of different things, of going to bed at the same time, of getting certain amounts of light at certain times of the day. And this is why simple things like when they changed the time zone a few weeks ago, it just has an incredible effect. Like 11% more people show up at the hospital with depression. Just because they changed the time by 1 hour.
Time difference.
1 hour a day. They've changed, and it throws them into a completely different state of rhythm.
And when we talk about rhythms with the setting of the sun, the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, so there's a biology in our bodies and our physiology for the most part responds to the light rhythm. Okay? When we wake up in the morning, we talk about certain hormones. There's a hormone called cortisol.
Right.
And we know this is from the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal. So it's your brain talking to your adrenal glands, which are little kidney bean size organs on top of your kidneys, and this is an actual response. So this particular hormone responds to the pattern of the sun with the rising and the setting. So we know first thing in the morning, it actually is higher, and there's a lot of energy that's supposed to be going on there,
right,
and get you going for the day. And what happens during the day and in the evening time, if you're not getting enough sunlight, we're finding a lot of people that have vitamin D deficiency. So first of all, to point out, vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a prohormone. And believe it or not, if you're not getting a lot of sun, there's something called serotonin, which we know regulates mood and all that too.
Right.
If you're not getting adequate sunshine, serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. So when the sun goes down, we know melatonin starts to rise. And there are certain things we do with regard to lighting that mimics the sun and actually downregulates the melatonin. So now we have a lot of people that have sleeping difficulty. They're having issues, and that's another added stress right there.
Right, added stress. You know, it's fascinating. If you really look deeply into how the body reacts to sunlight, you have cortisol starts to get more pronounced in your body in the morning in response to light, to wake you up, get ready for the day. You have most of your energy and your higher levels of cortisol in the morning so you can get out, do something, right? Then you have the melatonin, which is a direct production to the amount of sunlight you get. Serotonin's wrapped up in that. Vitamin D, which affects every level of your health. When you look at that, you realize we're not that much different than plants. We literally, our whole life is set up to light exposure.
Yeah.
And it has a huge impact on our health. The only difference is some of us have more interesting conversations. But other than that, we're really just plants. We react to the environment. We react to even slight changes in temperature. We react to every single person we even come in contact with. Plants do the same thing. You walk into a woods. This is fascinating to me. You walk into a woods, and the plants will either turn toward you or turn away, depending on what they perceive from you. Now, we all do that, the same exact thing. We walk into a grocery store, we walk into anywhere. We do the same exact thing to people. So the relationship there, we really are just part of nature.
We are in tune to nature, and the body can respond to those influences. So we know there's a circadian rhythm when we talk about the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, and how that can affect and be a stressor on the body. And we see that sometimes we have people in the evening time, they can't go to sleep.
Right.
And then if they do fall asleep, they're waking up between 2 and 4 in the morning. So that is an issue too. So let's actually move into a third stressor when it comes to blood sugar balancing and glycemic dysregulation. And a lot of this goes with the standard American diet, which has been dogma and preached from both the government and all these major corporations that run the mill of food that is produced to the U.S. And we talk about standard American diet, that's SAD. That is very sad.
Sad. I love that. Sad. It is sad. But, that's what I grew up on. Luckily, I ate at home a lot. But once like almost every other human being, what's the first thing you do when you get your own money? You start eating at fast food restaurants because you're out on your own. The problem with that is that most people never grow up. They never actually move out of that phase to where they're just not eating candy and fast food all the time. That becomes their diet, and that's what they exist on basically the rest of their life.
Yeah, they do. And we also realize the standard American diet, you have artificial flavors, colors, industrial seed oils, which are very inflammatory. A lot of the simple sugars, the wheat, it actually spikes the blood sugar. And what happens 2 hours later? The blood sugar crashes. A typical American breakfast. A bowl of cereal that's artificially flavored. Milk, orange juice, a bagel. I mean, these are simple carbs that break down very quickly. And again, what does that do to your cortisol level? Your blood sugar shoots up, then drops. And then to respond, your body says, hey, I need a quick fix. And what's that quick fix usually? Sugar, more caffeine. And you get that, then in response, your cortisol is going to produce a lot more cortisol to keep the sugar so it doesn't completely crash to going into a low blood sugar state.
Right. That's it's fascinating about the blood sugar issue because if you follow health like obviously we do, the last 6 or 8 years they've really come to realize that most of your health conditions, the chronic ones, center around your blood sugar.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Just everything is hinged on that and how it creates inflammation, how it drains your energy, and how it sets you up for chronic disease. All this talk about metabolic syndrome, they're really just talking about blood sugar.
They're talking about blood sugar and inflammation. That's what it comes down to. And there has been this huge movement in the last, 5-10 years, and even more recently, ketogenic, the paleo movement, which is a big focus on eating animal products, healthy vegetables, low glycemic fruits, and keeping those high glycemic, high carb, industrialized seed oils, keep it more organic, grass-fed as a way of living, and actually balancing out all these health problems. Because we realize a lot of these health issues we're seeing today, cardiometabolic syndrome, heart disease, even cancer, diabetes, it has a lot to do with diet and what we put in our mouth.
Right. The big statistic that I always like to remind people of that shocked me was on the blood sugar issue, that they now know that the average person, if their blood sugar shoots up to 140 to 150 after a meal, which for everybody is just the norm,
it is.
That's eating fast food, it probably goes way beyond that. Well, in that 3 hours, it takes your body to down-regulate that to somewhat near normal. You've doubled your chance of having a heart attack or a stroke.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Now, when you think about that, it's happening 3 times a day for most people. And a lot of people never fall out of that number. So they've got a double chance of having a heart attack and stroke for most of the day. So This is why heart disease is the number one killer. This is why it's up, because of that elevated blood sugar, yet hardly anybody focuses on it at all.
Yeah, how true is that? And even in conventional medicine, which is where I'm trained, the focus is not on any lifestyle prevention at all. Maybe we may have an hour or two class with regard to nutrition. Okay, you're diabetic, don't eat sugar, okay?
Right.
You have heart disease, we got to get your cholesterol down. Don't eat fat foods. Eat low calorie, low fat foods. I mean, this is a completely incorrect, and there's a huge paradigm shift with that. But we'll get that a little bit more specifically. I think that gives us a big overview. And one more stressor on the body, let's look at inflammation with regard to parasites, environmental toxins, EMF, over-exercising. These are some things we can talk about, which are also a chronic stress on the body, which we don't think about typically. It's usually, again, the perceived stress.
Right. All these things cause a stress response. It's fascinating to me that EMFs aren't in the news more than they are, and I think that's just because, again, what is it related to? Industry. Industry doesn't like any news to go out that looks like it might hurt their personal economy. And so that's what shapes our news and the information we get. Yet we're exposed to so many energy fields. And if you think about it, for the first, few 100,000 years of our existence, depending on how old you think people have been on the planet, but we were never exposed to any energy field except for the Earth.
Except for the Earth, and that's where the grounding is. And now we actually have all these other EMFs. So let's discuss briefly what EMFs are and how that can be a stressor to the body. Then we'll focus back in on the autoimmune. But I think it's important to address stress because it is such a huge component. 70 to 80+% of people going in to see a practitioner, the doctor, naturopath, whoever it ends up being, there's a stress component.
There is a stress.
And this is not addressed. And stress is so very important to address for that.
So the EMFs, which are electrical magnetic fields, right? They will have the greatest impact on someone who's unhealthy. This is very fascinating to me because I know we're going to talk about yoga and meditation, but yoga, meditation, going to church, all these different ancient techniques. In fact, every religion worldwide 2,000 years ago, what did they do? They had their service, their first day, 5 o'clock in the morning. Before the sun come up. Before the sun come up, you got up and you did either a meditation, you did a yoga, you went to church. It was all some form of that. And what was that about? It was to focus your mind on something bigger than yourself and your daily stress.
Absolutely.
But it also sets your energy for the entire day.
So this is very similar to setting intentions for the day.
Setting intentions.
So when you're setting intentions, if it is you get up, there's gratitude, there's love, how much easier is your day going to go? How is that going to affect your stress level, putting you in a parasympathetic rest and digest state? How important is that?
It changes your perception of every situation you're in during the day. And I talk about this with stress a lot because most people think, well, I'm stressed, I got to lower my stress hormone. Well, that's a small part of it, right? The other part is changing your brain so that you perceive stressors differently. And in that state of energy, just like we were talking about going to a service or doing a meditation at 5 in the morning, setting your brain up energetically changes the way you perceive stressful situations. Once you do that, you have less stressors. The stressors you have last a much shorter period of time, and your body goes easily into the healing phase where it just corrects everything. Because getting stressed isn't that big a deal.
It isn't.
It's a natural part of life. But the recovery thing is what we're all missing.
Right. And not all stress is bad. We kind of give it this negative connotation. It can be, but realize there's something called hormesis, which are positive stressors on the body, which actually build resiliency. And that can be exercise. That can be with intermittent fasting. That can be with taking cold showers. That can be with having relationships and community. And that actually builds your resilience. And we always think stress, bad. That's not always the case.
No. We're talking about how you react to stress.
That's correct.
How you let it go. Stress, really, if you're in the right frame of mind, you can turn almost any stressful situation into a very short-term thing that you just learn something from. Your body goes into recovery. You move on.
And you move on.
You move on, and it's done.
It is done. Yeah. So again, just a quick wrap up with stress. Now, we discussed 4 types of stress. The first one is perceived mental stress, how your body reacts from past experiences. Is there novelty to it? Is it something new? And how that affects your physiology. That's the first thing. The second is circadian rhythm, or how our bodies are in tune to the rising and the setting of the sun, some of the hormones that are involved there. The third thing has to do with glycemic blood sugar regulation, another stressor, and how that affects so many other, what we call in Western medicine, disease states, whether it be metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, even, things like that. And the fourth one are some of those hidden things which we talked about. Now let's transition into where we're initially talking about with autoimmunity, because we know stress is a huge component to any disease process. But with autoimmunity, there's something called the autoimmune spectrum, which we're realizing autoimmunity just does not happen overnight. There's a period, depending which disease state you're given a name for, it may happen 10, 20, 30 years beforehand without having any symptoms at all.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, because when you get into autoimmunity, you naturally fall over into diet. You naturally fall over into gluten issues, right? And I remember 10 years ago, I was giving a talk somewhere, and a lady came up, and she had been compiling research on gluten for 5 years. And at that point, nobody even really talked about gluten. It was a new thing. But she told me something that I know today is completely true, is that when you eat something that you're allergic to, you have a stress response, just like an emotional stressor. So if you're having emotional stress, eating things that cause a stressor to your body...
Stress responds, and we talk about stress eating, and you're having a reaction to that.
So anything you're allergic to, you're automatically in a stress response. So your emotional stressors are going to be so much worse because your body's just set up for it. And this is what I talk about this all the time. You want to set yourself up for having a different experience. And that's not just, how your brain chemistry is or anything else. It has to do with your diet. It has to do with your sleep, circadian rhythm.
Absolutely.
If you're not paying attention to that, the rise and fall of how all these energies move in your body, then you're going to be in a position to have experienced more emotional stress from a situation that shouldn't have bothered you much at all.
Oh, absolutely. And we realize the spectrum of autoimmunity, we have 10, 20, 30 years before it actually presents with symptoms.
Right.
And then there is this middle ground where you start having symptoms. You go to your doctor with these symptoms, and oftentimes it's a 7 to 9 year time before they can actually diagnose you. And by then, you have all this potential damage to your body because the body is attacking itself. And we realize, again, the genetic predisposition, but that only accounts for a third of those people that are actually diagnosed, which is crazy. So you don't have to have a genetic predisposition. Say like your mother, your sister, brother may have lupus, may have MS, may have inflammatory bowel disease, Reiter syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. You may not even have that genetic factor, but yet we realize the gut and environmental factors can be the triggers. So we talk about epigenetics. When we talk about genetics, that's what you're inherited, your inheritance, okay? And what epigenetics is are things that happen outside of the cell. If you do have a genetic predisposition, it can trigger and turn on those genes.
Well, this is, again, one of the things that fascinates me about functional medicine. And I know if I told you this, but I wish I would have found out about functional medicine like 15 years ago just for my own study. Because now I study it, and on my own. But what I like, again, is how it correlates with Chinese medicine in the fact that someone comes to you, and you know this, someone tells you they have something, you go, you got anything for it? Because they just want one herb or one pill for it, right? Well, the reality is that you probably have one issue going on, but you have 7 other things that medicine, normal, Western medicine's treating you for, that are just symptoms of the one thing you never took care of 15 years ago.
And that's the underlying.
And if you took care of the underlying, the next time I'd see you like a month or so later, you wouldn't have probably 75% of those other 7 things because they just disappear. They're just something that crops up.
Absolutely. So we know health problems, disease states are not in isolation.
No.
Okay? The blood goes through the whole body. And so we know from a cellular standpoint, even autoimmunity, it's going to affect every other part of the body. You just don't have a cholesterol problem. You just don't have a blood sugar problem. You just don't, it's affecting other organs.
Right.
But again, conventional medicine just focuses on that one thing. Okay? Or see a specialist. And getting back to it. So back to autoimmunity, again, we understand there could be a genetic predisposition.
Right.
Okay? And there's a spectrum. So this can actually happen years and years beforehand. And believe it or not, there is a lot of advanced testing that can be done right now to actually tell. It's called predictive autoimmunity. And there's actually a lab company called Cyrix Labs where they can actually take the blood and look at antibodies, and based on the science, they can predict when you are going to develop this actual autoimmune disease, whether it's 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, and they can give you a prediction. It's like having a crystal ball in front of you. Imagine having this crystal ball. You can actually see into the future.
Right.
You. And if you do things now to auto-correct that course, or what we call your trajectory in the direction you're going, you can put it in remission, suppress it, or it may not even happen.
Now, think about this. You find that out, right? So you got antibodies, and you find out it's only because you're eating a certain food. Wow. So all you have to do to avoid an autoimmune condition, which basically is classified in Western medicine as something that's going to kill you because they have nothing for it other than giving you steroids, right, to suppress. You find out it could be 1 or 2 foods that you could just quit eating. And within a year or so, all the inflammation goes away. You're out of the zone of catching an autoimmune disease, all related to just stopping a couple of foods.
Yeah, and we know food is medicine. And again, this goes back to, beginning of time that we know food is medicine, begins and disease begins and ends in the gut. So let's discuss. There's a huge trigger right now that we're seeing, not only for autoimmunity, but other conditions too, and that is gluten. There's so much talk about this right now. So let's go ahead and discuss, a little bit what this is and how it represents and responds to maybe leaky gut syndrome and the triggers for autoimmunity and other health conditions.
Well, gluten is, simply put, it's just a protein in wheat that's really hard to digest. And the latest research on that shows that every time you eat it, and they claim now it's 100% of the people that eat it, your body has a response to where the actual cells in your intestines separate. And in that separation, which lasts for 3 days, let's say you just had one exposure, that lasts for 3 days to where now your gut's more permeable to other things that you're eating. So things make it into your bloodstream that your immune system has to react to. One of the big issues with gluten is that it is in wheat, right? If gluten was in Brussels sprouts, everybody in the world would just quit eating it tomorrow. Nobody cared, right? But it's in bread. It's in all these things that we just are trained through society to eat all the time.
Sure, and that wheat is a staple of life. This goes back 1,000 years as a very inexpensive staple, which actually supports third world countries.
Right.
When they're starving, we see wheat is shipped over, but we're not seeing autoimmunity like we do here in the United States, Canada, Europe, some of these other countries. So let's discuss what has happened to wheat. And again, when we talk about wheat, there are cross-reactivities to other rye, barley, and there are some other, again, remember, wheat is only the protein, but there are other cross-reactive wheat and other types of grains too.
Right. Once you set up the permeability issue, then you could have more of a reaction to milk. You could have more reaction to eggs, more reaction to soy, more reaction to all these things. In fact, if you usually see someone who has 20 different foods they're allergic to, it's probably because of the issue with the wheat that's causing the gut to be permeable in the first place.
Sure.
And the problem with wheat that you don't see in other countries has to do with the fact that we are such an industrial nation. And I mean, let's face it, our science is just off the charts. It doesn't mean that it's always beneficial to us. It might be beneficial to the company using it. But the reality is they've changed our wheat. It's no longer similar to what it was thousands of years ago.
So your grandma's wheat is not the same today, and you don't see the autoimmunity outside of celiac disease.
Right.
We have so many new diagnoses and issues with autoimmunity. So just look at the science with the industrialized world. Wheat used to be wheat fields, 4 feet, 6 feet high. But to actually mass produce it, the combines, it took a lot of energy and resources.
Right.
So they have actually genetically modified it. So these wheat fields used to be 4, 6 feet. They're now 3 feet high. It's much easier to produce. That's number one. And number two, to actually protect the wheat, what are they spraying it with? Glyphosate. Roundup. And what does this do?
Well, they have it actually not only sprayed on it, and now they spray it right before harvest, so there's an extra dose, right? Which is great for sales for the company that makes that. But it leaves so much residue, but they actually have it grown now with that pesticide in it. Now, this is the thing that cracks me up about this whole genetic modification of putting the pesticide in a grain. That pesticide is in there to disrupt the digestive system of the bugs that eat it. And so to screw up their nervous system and kill them. But humans are supposed to eat that?
Same thing.
The
exact same thing.
And then we also have the issue is that they've increased the gluten off the charts. It has so much more gluten in it. And why is that? Because it makes it easier to make bread and noodles.
It's a glue. It's sticky.
It's a glue. And this is what happens when you eat it. It turns into this glutinous mess that your body can't break down and creates all this inflammation and trouble with your digestion.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring this up. When we talk about even gluten and even corn and how that's been genetically modified, even with the size of the stalks.
Right.
They are now, before animals such as cattle, pigs, chickens, before they go to slaughter, we realize they're giving this to them before. What does it do? Because it's high in the glycemic index, it fattens them up.
They get fat.
And now you're eating... You don't have to eat bread to have a gluten sensitivity. You're eating an animal who ate it conventionally, not organic, grass-fed. That's going to fatten them up, and you can have the exact same reaction because you're now eating eggs, chicken, pork, cows. It's crazy.
Well, then the added fact, as you get back to the inflammation in your gut, is they also feed all these animals pharmaceutical drugs that make them get fat too. So it makes you wonder, well, do people get fat when they take those pharmaceutical drugs? There's an asthma drug that they give to cows because in the last 30 days before market, they put on another 20% weight because of the asthma drug. In fact, Russia refuses to take our beef now because there's too much asthma drug in it, right? Well, in this country, we're all eating it. So what does that mean? You're eating it in conjunction with your gluten and all these other things you're allergic to, and you have so much stuff going in your body that creates autoimmune disease.
It's crazy. And we're talking about that asthma drug. It's a steroid, by the way.
Yeah, it's a steroid.
And that's very inflammatory, and that's already triggering what conventional medicine is using to treat autoimmunity. Like immunosuppressive medication. We know oral steroids, same thing. And if you're getting that in the cow, you're eating that too.
Yeah, the danger though with gluten again though is the emotional component to it. Everybody, if it was all just intellectual, trying to figure out, well, this is bad for me, I shouldn't do it, it'd be okay. But man, we grow up eating bread on everything. We're so attached to bread. Your mom making bread when you were a kid, cakes, all this stuff. And in fact, I have a gluten story myself. I don't eat gluten. I haven't for 9 years. But the reason I did it, and it was just kind of funny, my wife had been telling me for 10 years that I was allergic to gluten, but I didn't pay any attention to her. Right. So, but anyway, I went to a doctor and I was having some problems with my hand. In fact, for 5 months, I could barely use my one hand. I had broken it about 20 years ago and it never bothered me. Woke up one day, it was in May, and my hand hurt so bad I couldn't use it. And it got so bad that I couldn't button my shirt with it. I couldn't stick it in my right hand pants pocket. So I couldn't use that part of my pants anymore. Just couldn't use the hand at all. Really, and I'm someone who does a lot of my work on a computer. So it was really changing my life. Well, 4 months later, I go into a doctor. He tells me, well, you're slightly allergic to wheat, but you're also allergic to other things in bread. So why don't you just go off of it for 30 days? Well, 30 days was pretty tough. First 2 weeks was tough. But after that, I started to kind of forget about it. But I went and did a yoga weekend with my wife, who's an instructor. And I noticed after the weekend, I didn't have a lot of pain in my joints.
So why was that?
And I thought, well, maybe it's the wheat, right? So I decided on my own, I'm going to go another few months without it. Because I had read where it takes 100 days or something. Well, 120 days after I stopped eating it, I woke up one day and my hand was normal. It didn't hurt. I could button my shirt. I could do anything I wanted to with my hand. And it has not hurt ever since.
It's interesting when you talk about gluten.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be in the gut. You can have other physical manifestations of this. And this could be brain fog, joint pain, rashes. The list is quite extensive.
Oh, man. I tell people now that I like my hand better than bread.
Now, and it's interesting, we talk about wheat and why people, I'm going to say, addicted to wheat. I love a good bread, but I realize I actually have a sensitivity. I don't have celiac disease, but the same thing with my stressors. It actually causes me a lot of bloating, intestinal gas, so there is a direct correlation with my gut. But the wheat acts on the brain chemistry as the glutamorphone, such as morphine, narcotics, chocolate, sugar. So it creates that same addictive property. So people have such a difficult time getting off of wheat or anything that is bread-based.
And, a lot of that, too, is that you rarely ever talk to anybody that's not addicted to sugar. Mm-hmm. And so if you're addicted to sugar, every other addiction becomes so much easier. In fact, it doesn't matter if someone's a drug addict, alcoholic, whatever you want to call it. If you can get them to break their sugar addiction, the other things aren't that hard. And that's not a hard process to go through. But if you can handle that and you do it, the wheat becomes something that's pretty manageable. It's something you can really do. And for a lot of people, like you're gluten sensitive, it doesn't mean you can't have it once in a while.
No, I do. And
enjoy it.
Sure. But I know my body well enough. So I live by the 80-20 principle. 80% of the time, I'm following a paleo-based, nutrient, organic diet. But, listen, you have to live life. Sometimes, I love pizza. So once in a while, but I know I'm going to react to it, though. But I mentally prepare myself for that and realize, I'm going to have some gas bloating, maybe some fatigue. My energy level won't be good that next day. But, but at the end of the day, is that ultimately worth it?
Yeah.
I ask myself that, but still, I still fall victim once in a while.
Once in a while, but if you realize that and you have it, and like you said, they show that your body can completely heal from an exposure in 3 days. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're someone that has bad reactions to it, have a great wheat meal once a week and enjoy it. Have it be your big special thing. Have the pizza, Don't eat it for another week.
Yeah.
Do that type of thing. I myself, I do much better if I just avoid it.
Just avoid it. And again, you're going to have to make that personal decision. And that is something that you don't need wheat to survive. We realize it is not nutrient dense, with a lot of other...
have you had this experience? I saw on a study that they now have done tests where they took people that were gluten sensitive, that have a lot of different health issues, even though they're not celiacs, and they gave them fermented bread. Bread made like it was 2,000 years ago, fermented for 4 days, then made into bread, and they didn't have a reaction.
They didn't have a reaction because it's made differently.
It's made differently.
Okay.
What does fermentation do? It takes the gluten and transforms it into something else.
That's correct.
It's something your body can actually use. And you know what? I tried that once because I read that study, and for a week I ate the stuff, didn't notice anything from it. I no longer ate it after that week.
I actually experimented with it.
I actually experimented with it because I figured I'd want to tell people about it. Cool. And I didn't notice any reaction, yet I don't eat it every day because I don't think I need that in my diet all the time.
No, and you know how you react to it. You don't want that hand pain coming back.
No, I don't want I like my hand.
Now, we did discuss genetics, the spectrum of autoimmunity, and there are certain things, epigenetic stressors, and gluten is a huge one. Now, we did start to discuss a little about this leaky gut or this intestinal hyperpermeability. Let's discuss that in a little bit more details. We just kind of touched over it briefly.
Yeah, that probably starts out with the combination of two things, stress and then what you're eating. And the funny thing about that, if there's anything funny about it, is that when you're stressed, your diet goes completely haywire. So this is why I like to tell people you have to establish what your diet is going to be, because if you don't, when you go into stress, it's going to be the closest sugar fix you can actually get. And this is really, I like to remind people, you have 4 big things that you fall into with stress. They're all addictions: sugar, alcohol, drugs, and tobacco. And they all get worse with stress. Yeah. You have to have a program of what you're going to eat at every meal, in general, so that you just normally fall into that eating pattern. And then just because you're stressed, you don't reach for something that's real quick that throws your entire system off. Because those cookies you're having at 10 a.m. because you're stressed out leads to that shot of whiskey at 4 p.m. because you're getting off work. It leads to that cigarette 3 times at lunch break. It leads to all these things because you're fluctuating. Your system's in a state of fluctuation and inflammation. So you have to be able to establish that. But the stress sets you up. Your stomach now, your digestion just doesn't work. And so now you're putting something you're allergic to in it, gluten generally, because that's what most people eat every meal. That causes the more separation. Your digestion's weak anyway. All of a sudden now you're going to react to every single thing you eat.
Sure. And let's even go back when we talk about leaky gut syndrome or intestinal hyperpermeability. Now, we're talking a 1-cell separation between your gut and the bloodstream, okay? And these are called tight junctions. So if there's any inflammation, now, you actually need some absorption in the bloodstream of macro and micronutrients, okay? Because we need this to survive for health, for cellular health, mitochondrial health. But when you have a separation of that leaky gut or a little separation of the junctions, now you're letting in larger proteins, molecules, not only with regard to food. Now we have the potentiation for parasites, other bacteria, and things like this, which can trigger an even larger cascade. So when we talk about autoimmunity, auto meaning self, immunity, so it's attacking something. So it cannot distinguish between the food, the protein, the parasite, the bacteria, and some component, body, organ, or system.
Now, think about this one cell. This is when I found this out, and it's only been recently. That was such an eye-opener for me. Think about one cell. You know how thin a piece of paper is?
Yeah.
Is it 1,000 times thinner than that? Yeah, I mean, even more than that. It's so thin, and that's what's separating you from your French fries. That's what's separating you. Yeah, that's what's separating you from your cheese curls, right? And your beer. One cell. So, I mean, it's just like, just shove them right in there in an injection. It's mind-blowing to me. All that toxic chemical in those types of foods, one cell keeping you from it.
That is it. That's, if we could even fathom the consequence of just one cell.
That's the greatest visual for me I've ever had in health. One cell separates you from garbage or good stuff.
Yeah. So let's actually discuss, because we know autoimmunity has devastating consequences on people to their overall health, how they can bring and care for themselves, those people in their family, their children, their community. So it is devastating. And I'm seeing a barrage of this, especially in women, especially. And we're seeing that they have the most greatly impacted. And oftentimes in succession, it's like dominoes. You have one autoimmune disease. So like it starts out with autoimmune Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Then it turns into inflammatory bowel disease. Now you have Crohn's disease. Now you have cirrhosis of the liver, which is autoimmune. So it's like a whole bunch of dominoes in succession. And if you add up, there are over 180 autoimmune diseases. I can't remember the total. But if you add them all, the impact financially to the medical system, to health, it supersedes the top three, which is cardiovascular, diabetes, and cancer.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy. And I can see, women have, a lot of not only different reactions, but they have so much more. Their stressors tend to be emotional because they're involved more with like raising our kids and having to try and fit into the workplace and all these things that are more probably just long-term stressors you can't drop than men. Yeah. And so they have, they're just susceptible to more inflammatory issues. They have a menstrual cycle. They're more in tune with nature, or at least they can be, because of the fact their body's in tune so much more than men. And so they just have a greater opportunity to experience these things, especially if their system goes haywire.
And when we talk about a haywire system, let's go back to stress and cortisol and being a circadian rhythm. Now, women are a little bit different than men because they have a menstrual cycle.
Right.
Okay? So if a woman's circadian rhythm or daily cycle is out of whack, what's going to happen to her hormones in that cascade of her menstrual cycle? For infertility issues, severe PMS, menstrual migraines, menopausal symptoms. It's not normal for a woman to experience hot flashes, extreme fatigue. As a society, we think that's normal, and it is not. So not only are they having these autoimmune symptoms, they're having hormonal imbalances too. And it's a double whammy.
Well, this is one of the things that, in Chinese medicine, I literally could have opened a private practice just dealing with PMS.
Yeah.
Literally. And why is that? Because it's the stress impacts your menstrual cycle tremendously, and then everything else that you eat just piles onto that. And this is something people don't think about with food much, is that food can really disrupt your liver energy. I mean, the amount of grease and fried foods and fast foods and all these things are things your liver has to process, chemicals. It also has to deal with all that fat and all that. And then if you're, in Chinese medicine, your liver is part of your nervous system.
Sure.
So if you're stressed at the same time, your liver's not functioning at maybe half of its function, right? So you add the food to it, then it's just so backed up. And it's so many health conditions in Chinese medicine are just related to the fact that you're not emotionally moving forward. Everything's kind of stuck. And then all these digestive issues happen to it, all these shoulder and neck issues, all these different symptoms with PMS and infertility, all comes back to liver issues.
And if you realize, and the liver itself is the largest organ that actually processes and detoxifies chemicals. And we're looking at women's hormones such as estrogen, for instance. It oftentimes will go through the liver. It's processed.
Right. Then
it has to be eliminated, but oftentimes the body will reprocess it and reabsorb it. And this gets stored in adipose tissue, in fat tissue. So when women are having hormonal irregularities, imbalances, they're going to put a lot of weight around the center. Now, let's discuss briefly, because this is important also with autoimmunities, that's what we're talking about with women, with xenoestrogens and how that actually affects the body and puts women at risk for hormonally induced cancers.
Well, then you have the liver again that has to process. And what are the xenoestrogens? They're most of the pesticides. Almost every pesticide mimics estrogen, right? And so then you have all the chemicals that are in your cosmetics.
Cosmetics, too.
All the chemicals in your cleaning supplies. They're all estrogenic
estrogen compounds that mimic the molecular structure of estrogen, and your body can't tell the difference.
Right.
So it gets reprocessed, stored in fat cells, and puts you at risk. This is why we're seeing a rise in breast cancer. I have a cousin and a good friend in the early 30s, horrific bilateral breast cancer. They had to have radical mastectomies. That's the conventional way. But there's actually ways for actually testing the hormone metabolites so you can actually adjust. It's not going to say it's going to prevent it, but what you're eating, like cruciferous vegetables, for instance, actually helps downregulate those bad estrogens. And this can be done through nutrition, again, and stress. And if we can make that more positive and deal with it, that will actually also decrease that leaky gut and also help with the liver too.
Yeah, the people just don't think about the fact that if your liver's overburdened with pesticide, then it can't regulate your own natural production of estrogen, and can't use it right. And even when you're taking hormones from a doctor, your liver, if it's not in good shape, if you're eating too many allergic foods, you're too stressed out, it can't process the hormones they're giving you.
Sure, and it's interesting when we talk about hormones, we're talking about bioidentical hormone therapy, or a doctor will go, a patient, women will go to the doctor with hormone imbalances, and they will get put on a synthetic, which is crazy to me, or even something bioidentical, which has its place. But when you're getting these exogenous sources of hormones, your body says, and this comes back to brain chemistry, the hypothalamus pituitary addresses the adrenal, the ovaries, your thyroid. There's a reverse loop that says, hey brain, I'm getting this exogenous source, a cream or a hormone I'm putting in my body, or a pill or a patch. So guess what it does? It downregulates the body's natural production of these hormones. Now you get something called hormone resistance, and you have to up the dose and more and more and more till it no longer works anymore. Why are women doing this to themselves? To feel good. And it's symptomatic care that has its place. But long term, it can have some devastating consequences too.
This all goes back to Western medicine is stuck on the one pill for every disease type thing. Yeah. They're just stuck in that mode of thinking, and it doesn't work for a lot of things. I mean, I love the fact that we invented antibiotics once, and it changed the world. It was the greatest discovery of all medicine. They saved so many lives when they discovered penicillin, but they got stuck in that rut of thinking there's going to be one single pill for everything. And you know what? It doesn't work. And they're still looking for it for Alzheimer's. Never going to find it. They're looking for it for CTE. Never going to find it. It just doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
You have to look at all the underlying things and how you bring that brain back into a state of balance to correct itself. What are all the 30 to 40 things that are going on that you can't fix with one pill?
Sure. Now, let's kind of wrap this session up when we talked about autoimmunity. Okay, first of all, we know there's a spectrum.
Right.
Oftentimes, it will be 10, 20, 30 years before you even experience any symptoms. And then when you do, there's this middle road, 7 to 10 years. You go to the doctor before you can actually get a diagnosis. Right. So that's the first thing. And we know that genetics plays a huge factor, okay, but only in a third of the cases, okay? Then we have these external stressors, environmental, emotional, and perceived, gluten, and the third has to do with the intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut syndrome. Now, let's discuss couple real basic things people can do to address this on their own with regard to, sunlight, vitamin D, nutrition, and a couple things there.
Well, there's some basic things anybody can do. I mean, sunlight's free. You should get out at some point of the day. It doesn't matter where you live. We're lucky we're in Nevada. You almost have to avoid sunlight here so you don't get so much of it at certain times of the day. But you have to pay attention to certain issues, multivitamins, vitamin D, simple things everybody should be aware of and doing. Sleep, getting to bed at certain times, paying attention to clean water. People are still I run into people all the time and wonder why you don't drink tap water. And I mean, in Nevada here, it's especially because this is where they did all the atom bomb testing, right? There's all kinds of chemicals from that in the water supply here. You just have to filter it out. The government does a great job of giving you somewhat clean water that comes to your house, but it's your job once it gets there to turn it into something that your body actually likes. Just simple little things like that where you're drinking clean water, you're paying attention to getting sleep. You're taking a few basic things, and then after that, it's just dealing with stress. And then that for most people will be life transforming right there, that little program.
So it comes back to
stress.
And
then it comes back to stress, and then if you have issues, start looking at your digestion. Start putting foods into your body. I've done this in the last couple of years, and I thought I hated fermented food, right? God, I love sauerkraut. And there's an explosion in the health industry where you can just go buy 8 or 10 different kinds of fermented sauerkraut. So you just need to eat a couple tablespoons a day.
Yeah, so let's discuss that. I think diet is very important in nutrition when healing leaky gut and with autoimmunity. So first of all, I think some of the big ones, you can get food testing and things like that for sensitivities. It's not always necessary. You can actually put yourself on an elimination diet for 30 days and getting rid of even the big three. What are they? Wheat, dairy, sugar. And we also know there's corn and soy. So if you even get that out of the diet, that will make a huge difference. Because remember, these are all inflammation. And one inflammation in the gut lasts for 3 days. And the gut is a very quick healing organ. That's number one. Vitamin D, and I hate to tell you, I have tested so many people. I tested you once, and your vitamin D is through the roof. You are in a very good spot.
Oh, good. Good.
But vitamin D, natural sunshine exposure of the chest, 30 minutes is adequate. But sometimes supplementation short term is helpful. A couple other things when we talk about prebiotics and probiotics. Okay, now can you supplement this with a probiotic, especially that spore, soil-based? Yes, but I prefer getting things naturally through food. Now, when we talk about pre and probiotics, probiotic means life, something helpful for life. Now, and these actually help benefit the good bacteria in your intestinal system. And there's a balancing act. I like to look at it as a garden, okay?
Right.
And the probiotic is the actual seed. Now, the seed does not grow unless it is fertilized. So a prebiotic can be used to fertilize the probiotic to help it grow. Now, you just have to help it out with the sunshine, the rain. And you can do this with food. There are actually prebiotic foods you can get, like kavasa, there is potato starch, plantains. And if you just do this and rotate it once a day, that will actually help the beneficial bacteria. And that also gets back to the probiotics. There's so many wonderful probiotics out there. And foods, you have dairy kefir, you have kombucha, you have kimchi, you have sauerkraut. And rotate, because each one of these has a very different makeup of probiotics. Rotate just a forkful. Once a day.
I was reading that if you get a good sauerkraut from a store, right, and you take a serving of it, there's more probiotics in that than an entire bottle of capsules of probiotics that you would take in a month.
Yeah.
Now, that right there ended my buying of probiotics and capsules immediately because I just love eating sauerkraut anyway. It tastes, and they're like I said, there's so many different kinds, but
flavors,
the power of it, the power of that food, and plus things like cabbages, all these things have fiber in it that feeds good bacteria, and all these. So there's just ways of doing it that I think the big issue with most people is that we've gotten so far away from eating any type of a natural diet that our guts just didn't have a chance. We just really didn't have a chance to produce bacteria to feed into it. And then if you fall into that trap of having too many antibiotics, then you're just in this downward
It's going
spiral.
to wipe things out. Now, a couple other things you can do. We talked about bone broth. This is actually very healing to the gut, too. And basically, it's the bone and breaking down of the collagen, which is actually glutamine, which is a lining for in the stomach, and a nutrient that is very highly used in the body. There's also that and colostrum. When you think of colostrum, a mother, when she breastfeeds, the first 3 days, it's not milk, it's colostrum. That actually has beneficial bacteria and prebiotics to actually help boost the baby's immune system. So colostrum has also been known to be used to help heal the gut lining too. So it's interesting.
Well, breastfeeding, it's becoming one of those things nobody does anymore. And I can honestly attest that probably my youngest daughter is alive today because she was breastfed. She ended up with hemolytic uremic syndrome. If you remember back in, I think, 2006 or so, they had the spinach E. coli crisis in the United States. And a lot of people died. A huge amount of people got sick, but there was 20 people nationwide that got hemolytic uremic syndrome, which basically means your body's dying. It's consuming its own red blood cells, and when it reaches a certain point, your kidneys fail and you die. Well, my daughter was one of those 20 people.
Oh, wow.
In fact, there was 5 people in Northwest Ohio that even got sick from the spinach. That was the 5 people that lived in my house. And we got sick because my youngest daughter, who was about 16 months old, loved eating spinach. So I went to the store and got a bag of spinach, and she was eating it. We were all eating raw spinach salad, and then one day one of them got sick, and the next day 2 of us were sick, and then all of a sudden she was sick, and she spent 10 days in intensive care. And
well, I bet that was a stressful time for you.
that was I ended up, I didn't know if I had a backache because of the E. coli poisoning I had, or because I was sleeping on the floor for an entire 10 days, right, in the room. And so, but our doctor interviewed us, and this information here is so profound to me, is that we had a doctor who was from Syria, so he was different. He practiced medicine a little different. He was a kidney specialist for Northwest Ohio. He listened to our story about what we did for a living and how we ate, and the fact that our daughter was breastfed, and he determined that she was different than anybody he ever usually gets in his practice. And so he didn't put her on dialysis immediately. He thought she might have the natural strength to make it through without it.
Wow.
And this is the greatest example of why you want to eat well, to me, because you never know when you're going to have a crisis, and your survival depends on how much internal energy you have. For my daughter, his decision means today, because it took 9 full days for her to have one thing show up to where he knew she was going to make it. So we went 9 days not knowing whether she was going to live, right? But on the 9th day, her kidney marker went up. It was improving.
Oh, great.
And it was unbelievable. But he made that decision that she was strong enough to do it, and that prevented her from falling into the category to where 75 to 80% of those people will end up having a kidney transplant when she's 11 or 12, which she is today. And she has no problem with her kidneys. Because if you get dialysis at that young age for that syndrome, when your hormones start to change, your kidneys will fail and you'll need to have a transplant. Plus, you're in a 75% higher chance of having high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, every chronic illness known to man because of impaired kidney function. She missed the whole thing based on his decision, based on the fact that she was raised healthy. And he realized that she was strong enough to make it.
So that also comes down to resistance. So, during cold flu season, since I still work in urgent care setting.
Right.
We talked about the flu vaccine and why I myself personally have chosen not to do it. And I have found I come in contact with people day after day that have respiratory illnesses, influenza. I've been coughed on, spat on. But yet I remain resilient. Why is that? That is because the best I can. Again, I'm a work in progress. I'm still not perfect.
Right.
Stress management, sleep, proper nutrition, supplementing when I need it, And I think my resiliency has helped me there. And plus, we know the flu vaccine is a whole bunch of very smart doctors and scientists a year before that make a determination what the possible strain will be, looking into a crystal ball a year later. And we're realizing a lot of the time they're incorrect. And there are potential issues with the flu vaccine. As an example, my father has autoimmunity. He has ankylosing spondylitis. And another trigger, he had the flu vaccine, and he ended up getting myasthenia gravis, which is another response to that. He had lost the sensation of tingling in his hands for years. He couldn't even button his pants. He's over that now. Not had a flu vaccine since. But that was a trigger. Okay.
You don't realize vaccines work by triggering an inflammatory response. Yeah. If you already are having inflammatory responses, it's not a good thing.
No, it's not.
And there's a theory out there that it creates a inflammatory response in your brain for up to a year after you have one. So that's enough for me to... Of course, I've never had a flu vaccine. It's not for me. I've had the flu. I don't think it's that bad.
Well, here's the thing. If you are healthy overall, okay, so much, billions and billions of dollars is put into flu vaccines, which is a limited respiratory infection. Except for 3-4 days, you feel like death just ran you over with a fever, sweats, chills, body aches.
Right.
Then most healthy people, they recover. Yes, do some people die that are immune compromised, that have cardiovascular, respiratory health issues? Yes. But fewer people die from the flu than die from chronic disease. But so much emphasis is put into this little time of year and more money put into the flu vaccine. Okay?
Right.
And half the time we don't know if they're going to get it right from the year before, or what even the mercury and the other chemicals are going to do to you long term. Or those people that have autoimmunity.
Right.
It may trigger something else, let alone children.
Yeah, there's so much danger involved with it. The sad part about vaccines is that some of them are very helpful, some of them are very useful, but there seems to be this idea that you can't question anything because it's a vaccine. You can't question the fact that maybe it hasn't been studied, or they're withholding research that shows that it's harmed a lot of people. And they're making claims that aren't actually true. And there's whistleblower lawsuits out about it now. So my thought on it is, why don't we have more? If it's something that's so prevalent, so many people have to be subjected to it, why isn't there better studies? Why does a pharmaceutical company who makes a vaccine why are they not open to a lawsuit? Why is there a law protecting them from harm that they cause to somebody using their product? That makes me suspicious.
That does make me suspicious too. And I also look at children now. They will inject these poor babies that already do not have a built-up immune system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vaccines at one time. Too many at one time. I'm not necessarily against vaccines, and they, I believe, have made a big difference in the spread of disease. Okay, but not all at once. Spread them out. I think there's some progressive pediatricians and those that take care of children that are doing that, because they're finding their better responses, and not the issue of, well, my kid's going to have autism from this or some other, trigger for a disease state.
Well, they just came out with some new studies showing that they do now know that mercury in vaccines has an effect on your brain.
Imagine that.
But they've actually proved it. But of course, no one's going to hear about that study.
Yeah. So let's wrap up this session, and what have we discovered and discussed today? Stress in all its forms, autoimmunity, and what it is, the spectrum, and some simple steps we can do to, address it and overcome it. Now, conventional medicine, again, is not good at treating autoimmune and chronic diseases. We realize this. Now, from a functional standpoint, there is testing. We can look at stool testing. We can look at the type of bacteria you have, parasite infections. We can also check for celiac disease, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, cross-reactivity, these predictive antibodies. Okay? There are so many things we can look at. Again, we can look clinically from your HPA axis. We can do like an adrenal stress profile and see if there's a stress response. We can actually check for leaky gut too. This comes down to LPS, lipopolysaccharides, zonulin. We can test for that also. So there's so many things we can clinically look at, which I think is important. I think it's oftentimes you don't have to all the time, but it's best to test and you can address. Just not randomly throwing a dart at a dartboard with your eyes closed, hoping you're going to get the center. That's not always the case.
Well, for me, one of the great things about all this is that you're actually learning something. Mm-hmm. You're not just going and have somebody tell you that there's something wrong with you and give you a pill. You're actually going through a learning process to where you're not only finding out what's wrong with you, but what you're doing on your own that may contribute to that and allows you to change it. And down the road, you basically can learn how to change and set up your whole life to where you're not going to be affected by all these autoimmune conditions, all this leaky gut, all these things, because they're just mostly from habits that we do that we're just not aware of.
Yeah.
Right? So really functional medicine, Chinese medicine, it's all about raising awareness of your own self and how you move through the world and how to move through it thriving instead of just surviving. And it just puts you in a position to where you can have such a more fuller life and enjoy yourself and have more energy just because you're paying attention.
Yeah, and I like what you said there. We're about thriving, just not surviving. So We're taking our whole energy level. I think it's all about energy. If you don't have the energy to get up in the morning because of stress and all these other things that are weighing down on you, change your viewpoint, change your outlook. Okay? It is so important, and then your life will change.
But you know what? It's hard to do if you don't change your diet, because this is something that people don't connect nutrition with thought, nutrition with brain patterns, nutrition, but it's all interconnected. The better you feel because you're eating a better diet puts you in a greater position to experience life differently. And in that experiencing it differently, your body starts to thrive. You start to just see things differently. You don't get as stressed as much. All these things change. One of the pivotal aspects of everything, though, is your diet and how you're reacting to the food you eat. Huge.
So, Roger, do we have any final words before we sign off?
No, except that I'm having fun doing this. And, it's great to be able to sit around and discuss, common health issues, because this is what happens with every person I talk to. And you get this, I'm sure, and I mentioned it a little earlier, the fact that people will call you up, they'll tell you they have a condition, they want a pill. And they don't realize it's not their fault, really, because they've just been trained through advertising and Western medicine. That's what it is. I'm missing something. They don't realize, maybe 90% of your problem is something you're just doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I'm going to end on this thought. When we talk about functional lifestyle medicine, there are 3 core principles that I work with, and here they are. These are secrets, and if you get these secrets specifically, you can up the ante to your health, well-being, and vitality. 1, we do not treat disease. We look at the root cause. 2, disease begins and ends in the gut. And 3, it is the health seeker, the person that determines the outcome, not the doctor or the practitioner. Okay? We should be a guide, and 80% of the work is determined by you. The body has the natural ability to heal. We just have to give the right positive signals.
All healing comes from within if you're not drowning it with something else. You'll never hear the message if you don't change a few habits you have.
All right. Hey, well, Roger, I appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
It's been fun.
Likewise.